The Alter Rebbe in Shara Yichud V'Amunah explains that the ongoing existence of the world that we see, that we observe all around us right now, is a greater miracle than the most iconic miracle in the Bible, which is, according to Universal City Studio Tour, parting of the Red Sea. Yes, of course. Parting of the Red Sea. The ongoing existence of the phenomenological universe is a greater miracle than the iconic Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. How so? So he explains very simply. The splitting of the sea, we know the mechanics of that. The Torah tells us that there was a strong east wind that was blowing all night. And the wind was powerful enough to act upon the water and to push the water and to cause the water to stand like a wall. In other words, the mechanics of the splitting of the sea was something from something. It was a manipulation of the form of a something into another something. For instance, and this is the metaphor that the Alter Rebbe himself uses, when the silversmith takes a hunk of silver and he melts it down and then he makes a vessel out of it, what has he done? He didn't create silver. He manipulated the form. He changed the shape of this chunk of silver into a cup. Now, here's the thing. When you change the external form of something, it tends to stay put. It tends not to revert to its previous condition. And the reason is because it's not a major imposition to change the external form of something. You know, you could take this podium and you could take it apart and collapse it into pieces. And it's not going to reassemble itself. It's not going to strain to come back into this shape because you just changed the shape. It's not a big deal. Or you could even burn it and turn it into ashes. You could take this whole podium and turn it into a little clump of ashes. You're just changing the form. It's not going to revert. It's not going to reassemble. Okay, you're saying, I know that. What are you trying to get at? What are you explaining? Okay, so let me tell you what this is in contradistinction to. When I say when you change the form of something, it tends to just stay changed. As opposed to what? As opposed to what? As opposed to when you change the essence of something. When you change the essence of something, as opposed to the form, which is an external or superficial or secondary quality, when you change the essence of something, then it doesn't tend to stay put. In fact, it tends to strain to revert to its essence. In fact, that's kind of the definition of essence. Essence means what the thing is. So, for instance, and this is just a metaphor, it's just a metaphor, and it's a crude metaphor in the sense that it's the best I could approximate here in this very informal laboratory. But let's say this pen. Okay, this pen. The shape of the pen is not essential to the pen. And I mean, I could prove that pretty quickly just by disassembling the pen, right? Okay, and it'll stay that way. Okay, or I could melt it, could turn it into like mush. But what's essential to the pen? One thing that's essential to the pen, at least according to Newton, would be that it's inert. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest, right? Now, I could override that, and I can impose movement upon the pen, right? But it doesn't want to keep going. It wants to revert to being inert, to not moving. Because essentially, it's not moving. It doesn't move on its own. It can be moved, but it itself doesn't move. And that's sort of, again, it's just a metaphor, but that's sort of like an example of what happens when you try to override the essence of something. So it doesn't want to stay put. It wants to go back to what it really is. So you think about it like this. Every something was once nothing, however long ago in your narrative that was, but every something was once nothing. It wasn't always here. Existence wasn't always here. Okay, So it was nothing. I don't know a lot about nothing, but I'll tell you one thing I do know about nothing. Nothing doesn't exist. And therefore, to make nothing exist, you following? What I mean is to force nothingness into a state of somethingness is not a minor change. It is not a change to a secondary or superficial characteristic of the nothingness. To force nothingness into a state of somethingness is to override its very essence. And as such, nothingness is never comfortable in a state of somethingness and is always automatically straining. I don't want to personify this, but forgive the anthropomorphism, but it's straining to go back to its true self, which is non-existence. And that's why creation per se is ongoing. It's not something that happened, it's happening. And as the Kabbalah teaches us, if the Holy One, blessed be He, were to stop speaking the world into being, that's how He creates through divine speech. If He were to stop speaking the world into being, the world would disappear without a trace. It would be gone. It would leave no empty space behind. Because even that is among the trappings of existence. In fact, not only it would no longer be here, it would never have been here in the first place because it would lose everything, including its history. That is how totally dependent created existence is upon the Creator imposing it into its state of creation. Therefore, Shari Yichud V'Amunah tells us that really only God exists because the world, although it exists, it doesn't really have its own existence. Not in the absolute sense. It is completely dependent upon Hashem's existence, imposing it into a state of existence at every single moment. Which means not only is it totally dependent, meaning it depends on being forced into existence, it depends on being forced into existence for everything about it. So that's total, qualitatively speaking. But also quantitatively, it's constantly dependent. Completely and constantly. You follow what I'm saying? Qualitatively and quantitatively. Everything that exists depends on being forced into existence, and it depends on that for its everything. And it depends upon that all the time. There's no lag time. If God stops speaking the world into being, there's no lag time. It's not like if you pull the batteries out of a toy, how long will it keep moving before it stops moving after you cut the power? There's no lag time. Because every single second, a second is too big, but I don't know what unit of time to use. Every created being is dependent upon being forced into creation. So, if that's the case, then really, everything at this moment is being created exactly as the Creator in His infinite wisdom has decided to create it. And if so, it follows, how can I be distressed? You know what I took a long time to learn in life? Just because things are not in my control doesn't mean that things are out of control.